Hi everybody, David Lindstedt here. I want to talk today about a business continuity portfolio management office and explore that idea a little bit and think about what might be involved and how we might found and establish such a BC PMO. And we need to start our investigation at the capabilities level. Now this might look familiar. This is the RPC theory of organizational recoverability. For any service or department, basically what it says is the more resources, procedures, and competencies you have at time of disaster, the more prepared you will be to recover. So if we take the total number of resources, procedures, and competencies you need to recover from disaster, and we measure that against the existing capabilities, then we'll have a gap between what you need for full recoverability and what you actually have for that recoverability. So these are the capabilities. These are things that the department or the service could do following a disaster based on those capabilities. Of course, those capabilities happen within an aperture of constraints. Now, these are things that we can't do, and there's two kinds of restraints. First of all, two kinds of constraints. The first of all, we have some actual restrictions. So we can't take all the time we want to recover, we can't spend all the money we might want to recover, and we keep within a certain scope of recoverability. So these are constraints of time, cost, and scope. We will also then have very specific constraints of loss. So the loss constraints. We will lose people and things and locations. When we're preparing for a disaster, we can set and think about the time that we'll have to recover, how much money we can spend in a post-disaster environment, and how many things we need to bring up, what kind of functionality needs to be there. And we can also set the constraints for losses. Now this is the capability and constraint model of recoverability. It basically says that we have capabilities, but those capabilities work within an aperture of constraints. And so those are the things that we can't do. All of this happens within a department or service. All right, so any department, any service has a value. It has a purpose. It is there for a reason to provide a certain function, provide a certain service, a value. And it operates within a culture and a strategy. We won't go too deeply into those types of things, but that is the how it operates, the way we do things around here. And when we put those together, we have what they want to do, what they do every day, or what they're going to want to do in a post-disaster environment. Now, if we think about up a level from that is the entire organization. And if we had a picture now of all the departments and all the services within that organization, we'd have a very complex view of many different departments and services with their own value, purpose, culture, strategy, wants, constraints, and capabilities. And the organization itself has a purpose and a value. Why is this organization here? What does it do? And how does it do it? This is also what does the organization want to do? What does it do on a daily basis? But then what does it do in a post-disaster environment? Now we have to go out even further to what's called the market level. All of this happens within the marketplace of customers, competitors, companies, and stakeholders. The organization is serving a certain segment of the global economy, and we have to take into account the customers, competitors, companies, and stakeholders that they're functioning in. Now, in normal business, we know what those might be. In a post-disaster environment, these could change radically. Let me come back to that in a minute. Now, all of this has to go out one more level, and this is the last level, but all of this happens within an environment. A certain date, a certain time. When the disaster happens, it has a certain distance and duration, and all of this happens within a certain interpretation and meaning. Well, the job of the risk manager is to make sure that the disaster doesn't happen in the first place. The job of the business continuity professional is to prepare the organization for recovering should a disaster significant event take place. Now, let's think about the post-disaster environment. So if the bad thing happens, it happens at a certain date and time, happens with a certain distance or duration, and it has a certain interpretation and meaning. Is this something that has happened to us? Have we been attacked by enemies? Is this a natural effect? Is this something that could have been prevented? What is the interpretation of what has happened to us, and what is the meaning of that? Now that then affects the market. We may change our customers, our competitors, our companies, our stakeholders. The entire market may shift. And then the organization is going to have to take a look at what their value and purpose and culture and strategy are at this time. So based on the environment that has changed, the market that may have changed, what is the organization going to do? And we can see now why business continuity planning, well, let's call it business continuity portfolio management, is so complicated. Because so many of these things are unpredictable, and we're certainly not going to prepare for any particular threat or disaster. The impact, the time, the date, the distance, duration, the interpretation, the meaning, the changes to the market, how the organization wants to react to those changes are all going to be very different. What we need to do is start preparing our portfolio of responses, our portfolio of recovery, because within each one of these levels, the actual impact, the actual decisions are going to change. The organization may change its overall business strategy depending on what has happened. The department and the service may then have to react to that business strategy and change its value and its purpose within its own culture and strategy. And we will now have very specific changes to the impact of our loss. Remember, we'll have certain, in an actual environment, an actual disaster, we'll have certain people, things, and locations that have been lost, and we'll have certain constraints, restrictions of time, cost, and scope. And all of that then gets us back to our capabilities. What we can do, what we want to do, is restricted by the constraints, and also then our capabilities. What are the things we could or could not do? So the business continuity professional has to work at each level of this model for the continuous improvement of recovery capabilities. At this level, we're focusing on the continuous improvement of resources, procedures, and competencies. At this level, we're working on identifying the range of potential losses we want to prepare for, how many people, what percentages of things, how many of our locations, and what kind of restrictions are we going to anticipate in terms of how long we can take to recover something, how much we can spend, and what functionality. We have to work then at the department level. What are the values and purposes of this department? How does it operate? How could it operate in a post-disaster environment? Helping each department think through what they need to do in a post-disaster situation, particularly if they do not have information and direction from the organization. At the organizational level, now we work with the senior management to present them this entire portfolio of recovery capabilities. So now senior management has a number of levers that they can start to change as far as value, purpose, culture, capabilities, constraints. They can really have a lot of influence now in terms of starting to set the direction for recovery. And the business continuity professional must understand this entire environment. This starts to get us to a picture where we see why internet templates and checklists are not going to adequately prepare either the professional or the organization to recover from disaster. This is a very complex situation, a very complex scenario. We really are working on a portfolio of recoverability options and strategies and capabilities and constraints up and down the entire level of the model. The business continuity professional is going to have to move away from a traditional model into a more adaptive model for recoverability. This is a very complex situation, and it becomes both more and less straightforward for the business continuity professional. On the one hand, the goal is relatively easy. It is the continuous improvement of capabilities for every department and or service. It also becomes much more complex because the business continuity professional has to understand this entire range of work and the environment, market, organization for the post-disaster environment. For the business continuity professional, the goal would be to set up a business continuity portfolio management office or a recoverability or recovery portfolio management office, looking at the entire portfolio of options to prepare an organization to recover from disaster.